My name is Agnes Molnar, and I am going to talk about search quality management, today focusing mostly on enterprise search, although I am going to talk about only a little bit today about other perspectives, other aspects of enterprise findability too. But we are still staying inside the enterprise, so I'm not going to talk about internet search. I am not going to talk about the SEO of your website. So this is not for your internet search, but much more for your enterprise search inside your organization. I live in Hungary, in Central Europe, but I have been working with companies, with customers literally around the world. I have been doing trainings and workshops in almost 30 countries on 4 continents. I have been I almost said SharePoint Server MVP, but I used to be a SharePoint Server MVP for 7 years. This year, I have changed to be an Office 365 MVP. So I have been an MVP for 8 years now. My main focus has been always on information architecture, content management, and enterprise search. So I have been into this industry for several years. You can find my contact information on the slides. You will get those slides, and you will get this whole session. One very important thing to highlight is the Yammer network. This is not a Yammer network of my company, in the meaning of this is not a marketing network. This is not about doing any kind of marketing for my company, Search Explained. This is a network for people who are interested in any kind of enterprise search. If you are an end user, if you are a developer, if you are an IT pro or decision maker, you can join to this network. We have almost 300 members at the moment. And we have some very active discussions about the challenges, about maybe the issues you might have, and it's really active. And I am very glad to see this interest in enterprise search. The agenda for today is pretty simple, although the topic is very complex. I am going to show you some real-world challenges, also with some stories from my experience, what you have to consider when you plan for enterprise search. And then I am going to try to define what is enterprise search and what it is not. After that, we are going to talk about the quality of enterprise search, how you can define the quality, how you can decide if your search solution is good or not, or at least good enough or not good enough. And as a takeaway, I am going to give you a kind of action plan, what you can do when you get back to your business after this conference. So let's start with some real-world challenges. Usually, when I talk to people and when I talk to companies, the first impression I mostly get is that search is easy, or at least it should be easy. People working in IT with SharePoint think it must be easy. I just set up SharePoint, this is done. I create a search service application, I create a search center in a web application, I create a search center site or site collection, and that's all. Search is working. What's the big deal with that? The problem with this is that you should consider search as just a platform. Even if you turn it on and you get some experience like this, technically speaking, this is working, right? It provides you some results. But those are not the best results. The user experience is not customized for your requirements, for your users, for your context, for your needs. So technically speaking, you can say, OK, check, search is working. But from business perspective, from usability perspective, and from your user's perspective, this is not satisfying enough. your users won't be happy if you say it's done, because it is not. So what is the biggest challenge with this? The biggest challenge with search is actually not search, but finding the information that you need. We get more and more documents in the enterprise. We get more and more content. And finding the content that you need is harder and harder day by day. I do sessions at conferences and workshops on information architecture and information management as well, very often. And I found a very interesting research last year, which says an average information worker gets about 64,000 words of new information every day. 64,000 words. Can you imagine how long it is? This is about the average length of a novel on Amazon. If you take all the novels in Amazon and you get its average, it is 65 words. So you get a new book every day to read and process and work on it, right? So and it's overwhelming. It is much more than we can process. So actually we have to find some ways to work with it, to find the real information in this amount of content, because not every content we get is useful. Some of them are not useful, some of them are useful, but I don't need it right now. Some of them are useful and I need it now. And those are the relevant content, those are the relevant information I need now. And it is really important. So search is not only about the content, but it is also about the users. We have to provide the relevant content to every user. And it is also about the context, which means even if I am the same user, even if I do have the same content sources in enterprise search, in different contexts, for the different search, I might need different results. For example, if I am a salesperson, and if I work on a project, if I am in the pre-sales phase, I need different information about the same customer than what I need when the business is done, right? So the context is very, very important. We can get some context information about the user based on his or her properties. For example, where he or she is based, what role he or she is in, and those kind of things. Those are very important contextual information as well. But we have to be able to identify the current users' current needs at this moment. And it's really important. And the problem, or not really problem, but the challenge with it, that we have to identify each of those three. We have to identify the content when we plan for enterprise search, but we also have to identify the users, the personas, the audience of search, who will do search. And also, we have to identify the context. We have to identify in what context, what circumstances those users will use search. And we have to help them with it. So, as you can see, we need to do planning, a lot of planning when we want to do enterprise search. And as every planning process, it all starts with identifying the requirements. What are my business needs? And what I usually get as an answer when I start talking or working with my customers is, I want Google-like search in my enterprise. We know Google, we use Google, we are happy with Google, We want Google in the enterprise. And when I get this requirement, I always ask back, all right, how many resources you have to implement and maintain search? Do you have 0 point something person working on this? I'm just asking this because, as you know, Google has 10,000 of people working on the search engine. Do you know? OK, so one aspect of search is the ranking model, how you organize the results. Which result comes to the first position, which comes to the second, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a very, very complex mathematical algorithm behind every search engine. There is a ranking model or several ranking models behind SharePoint. You can customize it. There is a different ranking model behind Google, a different one behind Bing, et cetera, et cetera. Do you know how many employees are working on Google's ranking only? Nothing else but ranking? Yes, 3,000. All right. I don't think you.
What do they actually do? Because surely they're not actually ranking.
They don't ranking. They are developers. You know, I mean, working on the ranking model, the mathematical model behind it. They are optimizing it. They are changing it. If you are into SEO for websites, you can see Google changes the ranking model at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. And this is what those more than 3,000 guys do. So they are not ranking the actual results, obviously. So I am pretty sure your company does not have more than 3,000 people working on the ranking model, right? Neither working on enterprise search. So even if I find some companies who says, all right, we have more than 0 people working on search constantly, I am happy with that. If this number is more than 1, that is extremely good. There are some companies, and they do very well. But if you say, all right, well, it is the responsibility of the IT pro guys or someone in the IT, or it's not enough. So obviously, you cannot have Google in the enterprise. The second reason why you cannot have Google in the enterprise is the different needs. When you search on the web, on the internet, you are looking for public content. Public content has totally different characteristics than your content in the enterprise. You don't need permission management, for example. You are searching for public content. In the enterprise, security is one of the most important things, right? Permission management is always critical. And there are some other differences related to the properties, the metadata, and everything. So you cannot have Google-like search. The second requirement I get very often is, I want it just work. Enterprise search is enterprise search. But if you cannot define what you need, I cannot help you to implement this, right? As a consultant, I can go there, I can share my ideas, I can share my experience, but it is not enough. It's not customized. You have to know your requirements and your needs. So please think about it. Last but not least, what I get very often, we want to find everything. Right? We have hundreds of millions of documents, and we want to find everything. We cannot tell you what this everything is, where this everything is stored, but just let's make it work. This is also not enough. So you have to identify the content, the types of content, the sources of content, and a lot of things. So you have to define what this everything is in your business. And obviously, it's very important to know that not every content is useful. You have a lot of mess in your enterprise, and this is normal. This happens to everyone. But the more mess you can filter out of search, the more value you get into search. And the problem is the more content you add to search, the more mess you add to search too. So it is to find a real balance. And how to identify those requirements in a more formal way? Because obviously saying I want to be able to find everything or I want search just work is not enough. So when we talk about the requirements of search, you can see that we have many, many, many aspects of search requirements. First of all, we have to identify the business goals. Who is the driver and why do they need search? You have to identify, sometimes I even say you have to identify the pain points you have in your business. Why you need search. And usually the pain point is what and why cannot you find the information you need. All right? This might be because search is not implemented in your company, or search is implemented but not working, or sometimes companies have 3, 4, or even more search engines in the company for different applications, and it just takes a lot of time until they can find and they can collect every information they need. I used to work with a legal company like 3 years ago. They were a customer of mine. And they didn't have any enterprise search solution, although they had hundreds of lawyers working in this company. So every time they got a new case, the lawyers collected what information they wanted to collect, went to the assistant, and in many cases it took weeks, even up to a month or two, to collect all the information because they had a lot of information on paper. So the assistants got a list of the information that the lawyers needed, and they sit down and started to read the papers and started to work with a lot of papers. And for weeks and months, they were working only on collecting information for only that one case. So they decided to implement, first of all, they decided to digitalize those papers. So this was a huge project for this company. Second, they decided to implement some enterprise search solution. And without going too much into the details, at the end of the project, it obviously took a very long time, but at the end of the project, this amount of time went down from weeks into minutes. It's a lot of money. A lot of time and a lot of money, right? So if you do have those pain points, and this is a very extreme pain point, I know. Sometimes it's very hard to measure and very hard to identify those pain points. But this is the first thing you have to identify. After that, you have to identify the use cases and scenarios, how your users will use search. In this case, lawyers wanted to collect information about similar cases before. The next important thing is application lifecycle, your search application lifecycle. And this might sound maybe a little bit strange, but the search application also have a lifecycle. I am going to talk about this in a few minutes. You have to identify the content sources, the systems to integrate now and later. Maybe you have integrating SharePoint content or file shares into SharePoint is easy. Most likely you have to start with them. But sometimes not sometimes, every time, you have different content sources, content management systems, HR systems, SAP, etc., that you want to integrate into search, but integrating those systems into SharePoint search or any kind of enterprise search is a more complex situation. So maybe you decide, all right, in the first phase, let's integrate SharePoint and file shares only. And then in the next phase, let's integrate the HR system or your SAP or whatever else. You have to decide the user experience. Do you want to go with some light customizations, or you want to implement some search-based applications? Do you want to provide charts or diagrams or maps, or the text information is just enough? You all have to decide it. It's very important to know that everyone likes to see the information. So sometimes a nice diagram or map speaks much more than hundreds of lines of information, right? So sometimes it really works. You have to identify the metrics, the success criteria. When I can say my search implementation was successful, when I am happy afterwards, and when search is already in production, how I can measure its usage and everything. The next one is the milestones and resources and experts. So I have to decide the milestones, the deadlines, when I want to roll out new features into search, what kind of resources I have, what kind of resources I do need, and what kind of experts I have to involve, and what kind of experts I want to involve or I can involve into this process. This is always a very big question, and people consider enterprise search as a project, maybe an IT project, sometimes a business project, but a project. But you have to know that search is much more than a one-time project. If you want to implement enterprise search, it is very important to run a project at the beginning when you implement enterprise search. But after that, you have to know that based on your content and users and context and everything does change. Therefore, your search has to change as well. So search has a kind of evolution. It has a life cycle. You cannot sit down and say, I am done with enterprise search. It's working. Yes, it is working today. But tomorrow, next week, or next month, you might identify new requirements, new needs, new wishes of users, which you have to implement into your existing search requirement. So usually, it's very hard to identify this behavior or this aspect of enterprise search. But what usually I say, consider search as the part of your business processes. Enterprise search is a business process. You have to plan for it, but after the implementation, you have to analyze the results of your implementation, reactions of users, the user's behavior, etc., etc. And as the time goes on, you have to analyze those results, and based on that, you have to plan for the next step and the next step, etc., etc. Once or twice a year, you have to analyze everything related to search. You have to collect feedbacks, and you have to start working on it. And this is really important. And usually I say enterprise search is like gardening. Planting the plants, the flowers, the trees, and everything is very nice. And the result can be very nice, right? But if you don't water them, if you don't cut the trees, it's going to be a jungle very soon. So a couple of months ago, I was speaking at the SharePoint Saturday UK, And I was talking about this. I used a different a different picture for demonstrating search is like gardening. And in the audience, there was a guy who created a kind of picture representation of this. So this is the happiness of having your garden, having your enterprise search done. You know, when you plant everything, when it's new, when it's really green, it's spring, you are happy. But in a couple of months, it gets a jungle. But if you take a different approach, and after being happy, you start working on it, you water it, you cut the trees and the bushes, you will be very happy with the result. So after the session, I've got this picture from that guy, and I really like it. Therefore, I've been using this since SharePoint Saturday. So all right, but let's talk about the quality. Let's talk about what makes enterprise search good, because it's really nice to say it is good. But maybe what is good for me is not good for you, right? And it's very important to highlight that enterprise search is not only a technology. It's a lot about people, and it's more like a psychology. So you have to know your people. You have to have a lot of soft skills to be able to implement successful enterprise search solution. So basically, when we talk about the quality of search and how good search is, it has different aspects. We can talk about the quality of results, what I present to the users, to the current query. But at the same time, talking about the relevance of the results and the ranking of the results, the ordering of the results, is also important. I really don't want to be the bad girl, but really, people are lazy. I am sorry for saying that. If they cannot find the proper result in the first page or the second, they close it and won't use search anymore. So relevancy and the ranking of results is very, very important. It's also important to talk about the quality of user experience. How nice it is, how it is presented, what kind of refiners they have, how the information is presented to the users. It's very important, because if I use a user interface from 20 years ago, people won't be happy at all. And it's also very important to talk about the supportability and maintainability. If you always have infrastructural problems with your search, if it's slow, if it stops working, people won't use it all. And it can be nice, it can be good, it can be really fancy, but if people don't use it, it's not a successful search. And I highlighted this one, the quality of information architecture, because it is one of the most important things when we talk about search. Why? Because search is always based on your content. You search for some content. What can you display on the user interface? Information about your content, metadata. What can you use for refiners? Metadata. What can you use to filter in your queries? Metadata. What can you use in your ranking model? Metadata. Everything is metadata in search. And metadata goes back to the information architecture. So if your information architecture is poor, creating good search experience is very, very hard. In most cases, it's easier and therefore cheaper to improve your information architecture first and then implement enterprise search than trying to implement enterprise search on a poor information architecture. So I cannot highlight it enough. Information architecture is one of the most important pillars of enterprise search. So when you start working on enterprise search, and if you don't have any metadata, if you don't have any kind of information architecture, that's a big, big, big challenge, right?
We've done any work on how to educate people to improve the quality of the metadata in like Office documents, or is there good presentations or blogs about how to do that?
That's a very, very good question. As I said, it's a lot of psychology. At the same time, it's a very good feedback, though, because I wouldn't say I have already started to write it out of myself, but I have collected some content pieces. So I get it as a feedback. Yes, you need it. I mean, I need to write about it. But unfortunately, there is no, I cannot recommend, hey, this is the magic book or this is the magic blog about it.
Because we did a project just this right now, and one thing our users were saying is the way to get it better is to actually enforce either management to do it or not give us our PIN if it isn't done, like a bonus if it isn't done. This was the users telling me how we think we should implement it, because I was kind of managing the project. But it's interesting the users have said if people don't do it, don't give them their bonus.
Yeah, so.
Kind of, do you whip them with a stick, or do you say, or do you show value and then they then learn? I just wonder if there's anything.
Yeah, when I want to shock my customers or my potential customers or whoever I talk to, what I usually say is people tag much more Facebook pictures than documents, right? And actually, this is true. Why? Because of motivation. Of course, they don't get bonus for tagging Facebook pictures, but they get feedback, they get likes, they get comments, they feel cool.
So you do get something back. I mean, and that's maybe one way.
Yes. When you
But it's something that's different because when you're posting something out on the web, you kind of want it to be found. How often does one search for their own intranet, for example, content? Not very often. So it's a very different mindset.
It is. It's a very different mindset. When you write a blog post, when you post a picture, you want people to see it, you want people to read it. You even check Google Analytics to see how popular your blog is.
But I think even if you're buying something, somebody's selling you something, and they want you to find it.
Exactly.
So everything on the internet that's public facing is wanting to be found.
Exactly.
And maybe it's a case of, we have a thing where people might not want to share their information because they think if I share all my information, am I need it? I mean, maybe it's, I was just wondering if you had
Yeah, absolutely.
creates more work.
Absolutely, and in the enterprise, in the everyday job, how people consider to be done with the document. I created the document, uploaded it, and done. Let's go to the next task, right? Even if you force them to put metadata, as I said, people are lazy. Of course, not you. Nobody in this room is lazy. Of course, I am lazy, but not you. But, you know, I create a document, upload it, and done. Even if I am forced to put some metadata on the document, I am lazy. I put the default value, I put ABC, I put 1, 2, 3, whatever. I just don't think about it. And the other thing that is really, really interesting, you know, the difference between taxonomy and folksonomy. Taxonomy is a managed thing. You have a control over it as a business. Folksonomy can be extended by anyone else, by any users. So when you use folksonomy, people can type in any kind of tag. People can use any kind of tags. It's a free text. They can extend the folksonomy as they want. And some researches show that people use folksonomies much more than taxonomies. And it's also a really important psychological thing. You might think taxonomy gives help to the people, right? Because this is controlled. I have the values there. They just have to pick it up. They have to select the correct values from the taxonomy. but people tend to use folksonomy much more than taxonomies. And it is also really important because from findability perspective, taxonomies has much more values because they are a control set of value, right? And this is, again, a very interesting oxymoron because the more control you have, the people use it the less, and vice versa. So it's very hard, and unfortunately there is not a silver bullet for it. I cannot tell you, hey, this is what you have to do to do the magic. Otherwise, I would be on the Caribbean now, having so much money, I cannot even spend it, right? So it's really interesting. And the next thing that is really interesting, I talk to Microsoft very often. And I talked to the product group the other week, and they said, all right, we just realized the importance of information architecture. And I was like, oh my God, you provide solution, I mean technology for information architecture in SharePoint and Office 365 for millions of users. And you just realize the importance of it? Come on, right? So, and I don't know, so sometimes I am really surprised. All right, so let's talk about the quality of results. Because this, yes?
In terms of quality of results, and I would guess therefore quality of content which is being searched upon, I'm just wondering, without spending hours talking about it, just thinking about, deep down in the bowels of the SharePoint search binary file, I mean, I'm presuming that it is indexing the content. When it's indexing, is it purely looking at tags, or is it looking at other things such as within document frequency, proximity ordering, within index frequency, semantic HTML markup, for example, perhaps assigning greater values to headings and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so what SharePoint does, so let's make it clear. SharePoint is not a semantic search engine. You can purchase some add-ons, some additional tools on the top of it to make it closer, but SharePoint is not a semantic engine.
That doesn't surprise me, bearing in mind the source.
So it is not. It does index the metadata, it does index the content of documents. It even stores the relationship between documents with some links into the index, proximity and a lot of other things. But yeah, it is not a semantic engine. You can make it closer than out of the box, but it's still not a real one.
Something to add to that is the analytics side of search is quite clever. So although it's not semantic, it does learn. So it can be more relevant the more it's used. So the more things are searched for and the more items that are found, if you click through them, the analytic engine will learn about which items are more preferred over others, and that will affect the ranking, it will affect those optimized. So
Yeah.
it will learn, it will get better, but it's never going to be exactly what we want without being coded.
Exactly, thank you, absolutely. All right, so basically the quality of results is based on the quality of the content and also the quality of the content that is included into search. And it also includes the quality of metadata you can include into the index. Sometimes you have to do some massage on it. I mean, if the content is tagged and the information architecture is clean, obviously you have a much easier work to do. But if not, you still can use some auto-tagging solution or auto-classification solution to put better metadata, to use better metadata in the index. But basically, everything is based on the quality of content. When we talk about the relevance of results, what I usually say is that enterprise SEO is the information architecture itself. People cannot work on making their content more popular except using information architecture. Everything is metadata based again, including the ranking. If you want to modify the ranking, for example, when you implement enterprise search in SharePoint 2013, it is really interesting and sad at the same time that content freshness is not part of the default ranking model in SharePoint 2013. It was in 2010. What does it mean? It doesn't matter if your content is 1 day old or 3 years from the perspective of the ranking model. And in most cases, this is not good, because the more fresh your content is, the more relevant it should be, besides other factors. But content freshness should be included into the ranking model. And there might be other business-specific cases when you want to change, when you want to optimize the ranking. And we have actually 2 options to this. The first is you can modify the ranking model, or you can create your own ranking model. But this works only on premises, not in the cloud. In the cloud, you cannot change the ranking model. In the cloud, you cannot create your own ranking model. What you can do is the ranking model is to use query rules with xrank. I don't want to go into the details because this is not a technical session, but this is the way. And if you want to see how it works, just search for Office 365 query rules xrank, and you will find how to do this. It is very nice, very powerful, and with some very easy tricks, creating some very easy query rules, you can see a lot of improvements in your environment. So last but not least, let's talk about supportability and maintainability of search. It is very important. Again, search is like gardening. Don't forget about it. You have to keep resources working on search, even after the implementation phase. IT guys, search managers, at least 0 point something, right? Even if you don't have 2 or 3 people to work on search, you have to define whose responsibility search is. It is very, very important. And it is very important to identify, especially during the implementation, but even afterwards, to identify who should work on search. And I have collected, just as a reference, I have collected you several roles for a search project and the search process itself. What is important to know about it? The internal resources are your employees working with your company, working in your company, so they are internal persons. There are some external persons who can help you, consultants, vendors, external developers. It depends on your company and how much and what kind of resources you have and you don't have internally. And the third column is for liaison, which means sometimes you have the business needs inside your company or on the business side, and you have the technical side, and you need someone. In most cases, this is a project manager. In most cases, this is a consultant who can kind of translate between the business and the technology side. So when the business says, hey, we need this and that, this person can translate to the technology side, hey, this is what they need. And of course, what he or she can say this way is more technical than business. So he or she must understand both the business and the technical side of the story, and this person can be internal or external. This is why I created a separate column for it because it's somewhere between the two. So how we know that search is good, or at least good enough? After the implementation, the first thing is users don't complain. This is a very good, although not formal metric. You cannot formalize this, right? Of course, you can create a feedback button on your search, and this is a very good practice to create some feedback form or feedback button on the search interface. But you know, when you just drink a coffee or have a lunch with someone, and they are happy with search, this is the best feedback, right? If they complain, oh my gosh, I tried to use search and I couldn't find this and that, that's not a good sign. And the second one is users keep using search, which means when you roll out the enterprise search, or you roll out a new feature, at the beginning, of course, people are curious and they want to try it, so the usage goes up. But if it goes back down, or even lower than before, that's not a good sign. That means they don't like it, right? But if they, all right, not on the peak, but maybe a bit lower, but they keep using search, that's a really good sign. All right, so those are two not really formal metrics, but you can actually measure the success, at least on some level, with them. But let's talk about some more formal metrics. So number of searches, this is obvious. How many searches people did during a day or during a week. Number of successful searches. In how many cases they found what they was looking for. Number of searches with 0 results. This might mean some content is really missing from search, so you have to add a new content source. You have to create new content. Or maybe it's just some common misspelling. You have to add some new expressions to your search dictionary, so it might be different. You have to analyze why those searches had 0 results. Results with no click. If a user doesn't click on a result, that means that result is not useful. It is also a really important thing. Most popular queries, what your users are searching for. Results click the most popular results for a specific query. This might be a best bet later. Who is performing the most searches, which means who is the most searching user or the most searching department. You can even give away a prize at the end of the month or at the end of the year, right? It can be a good motivation. Of course, the goal is not make people sitting in front of search and entering queries all day long. But if someone or a group uses search, that means that person or that group finds search useful. Correlated searches, similar searches, those kind of thing. Speed, latency, we are going into some more specific, but you can see that there might be a lot of different metrics in search. It's very important to identify what is the best metric or what are the best metrics for your business. Maybe the number of searches is a good number, but it is not enough. Maybe most popular queries is what you are interested in. Or maybe the results with no click. Or if you want to motivate your users, you want to identify the users who have been using search the most. It's really up to your business, and it's always a process to identify those metrics. So the analytics process, analyzing those metrics, looks like first we have to identify the metrics. We have to identify the responsibilities. who is going to analyze those metrics and who is responsible for that. How often? Every 3 months, twice a year, once a year. You have to do this. You have to put the milestone. You have to say, all right, you have to do this, this, and that often. Otherwise, it will be delayed and delayed and delayed and never happen. Last but not least, you have to define what to do with the results. I can create a very nice report of the analytics. But if the business doesn't do anything with it, that's all. It's not useful at all. One more document in SharePoint. So let's talk about the action plan, what to do and what you can do. First of all, start a discussion about enterprise search. It is very important. And from the first discussions, usually takes a long time until the real implementation. I have a customer right now. We started to discuss about enterprise search 2 years ago. They approached me literally 2 years ago. First, I shocked them because they were like, all right, we are a big global company. We want an enterprise search solution. And during the first discussion, I started to convince them, all right, let's talk about the information architecture and the quality of content and those kind of things. So they were like, oops. So after that, they went home. They started to discuss those kind of things internally. And it took more than 1.5 years until they were mature enough to start an enterprise search project. During that period of time, they improved the information architecture. And it was really good to see that. So this is how it should happen, but it takes time. So if you start talking about enterprise search, if you start talking about information architecture improvements today, that doesn't mean you are done tomorrow. It takes time. But at least you should start a discussion today. You should evaluate your current search solution. What is good? What is not good? What your users do like, what they don't like. You can organize some formal discussions, some meetings, some brainstormings. Or you can just start walking around, talking to people, collect the feedbacks, and those kind of things. You also have to evaluate your content. As I said, quality of content, quality of information architecture is the key for the quality of search. You have to collect the use cases and the scenarios, and also you have to identify your key users and audiences who will use search, in which context, and what kind of content they can expect in those cases. So as a result, you have to decide if your search is good enough or not. If it is good enough, the bad news is there is always something to improve. But this is the good news at the same time, of course. If it is not good enough, you already identified where to start, right? So collect feedbacks, collect the search analytics report from the search engine. If you use SharePoint, obviously this is the SharePoint analytics reports. You can even collect the crawl logs, the errors and the warnings from crawl log. Analyze everything, and based on the results, take action. It takes time. Even collecting the information takes time, analyzing the information takes time, and taking action takes time as well. And keep measuring and analyzing the content. So as I said, it's a continuous process like gardening. And as closing my session for today, keep in your mind that findability is much more than enterprise search. So finding the information is also possible with using a lot of other techniques, and we need a lot of other things for good findability. Besides search, information architecture is a key. Navigation can help people to find the information if they can navigate there. It is very important. the user experience, how they can access the information, permission management. As I said, permission management is really important in the enterprise, in your information architecture as well as in your enterprise search solution. And user interactions, user profile and personas, and machine learning solutions like in Office Graph drives us to more like discovering information and those kind of things. I am going to have a session tomorrow about this kind of things like discovering new information with the help of Office Graph and Dev. It is, I think, at 3 or maybe 3:15 in the afternoon with Dan Harm. And the title of that session is Making Sense of the Information Jungle. And we are going to talk about more from this perspective of discovering of information. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. Of course, if you have any questions, just let me know right now, during the break, later this evening. Tomorrow, I am around all day long tomorrow, or drop me an email, or any way you can. I am always happy to help you. And thank you very much.